Welcome to a special conversation today, everyone. I am joined by multi-hyphenate, conservative commentator, entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur, and my favorite perhaps title, colleague of mine at the Independent Women's Forum, Carrie Sheffield, to talk about her brand new, I would say her first ever book. It's a memoir about her life experiences. It's called Motorhome Prophecies, and it's out now on March 12th. Get the book wherever books are sold. And let's support Carrie in this endeavor. But Carrie, since I've known you and gotten to know you, I've been really fascinated by your life story. I don't know how, personally speaking, you were able to endure so much trauma and come out really strong by all appearances. So why don't you talk about the impetus behind your book? Why did you want to catalog your life story and briefly share what happened in your life for people who don't know what kind of precipitated your rise in policy, media, and the like?
Thank you, Gabby, and thank you for that shout out. Here's the cover if folks are interested in Motorhome Prophecies, A Journey of Healing and Forgiveness. I wrote the book. Right now, I think timing-wise, my hope is that it will be helpful for people because we're seeing unprecedented levels of suicide and depression. So COVID hit a lot of people, especially young people, mentally and emotionally and socially. And to the point where we just got data late last year that 2022, which is, it lags behind, but 2022 was the highest number of suicides ever recorded in American history. And it's the highest rate since the end of the Great Depression, since 1941. So something's wrong. You have a lot of young people who are feeling an existential crisis. And I feel like with my life story, I had my life crisis and existential crisis before COVID. So I wrote the book with the aim of trying to share and hopefully teach and warn young people and just people in general who are struggling and provide some hope. So that's why I wrote it. And it's a story of a lot of trauma and a lot of abuse. The title is called The Motorhome Prophecies because I have 7 biological siblings and my parents, so we had 10 people living in the motorhome. Because my father claims he has Alzheimer's now. He's almost 86, so he's not active anymore. But at the peak of it all, he claimed he was a prophet and he was sent by God to save America from destruction and that he would be president someday. And in order to do that, we had to travel around the country. Initially, him by himself, he was playing this beautiful classical guitar music. If any of your viewers or listeners know about Andre Segovia, he was the world's greatest classical guitarist. He was knighted by the King of Spain. He has an asteroid named after him. He hand selected my father to be one of his proteges on classical guitar. So he took that training as a classical guitarist and would play music on street corners all over the country. And I ended up going to 17 public schools and homeschool. He would play the music and pass out when listeners came to listen to this beautiful music. He had an amplifier on the streets. He would then pass out thousands and thousands of, he called it a bookmark, but it's brochures with spiritual quotes from him, trying to convert people to be Mormon. So he was Mormon, but he was later excommunicated by the official Mormon church. So what he was doing was not official. And as we got older, we all had to join him on the street corner. So I grew up playing music on street corners with my dad and passing out all these brochures and trying to convert them to Mormon. I'm all for sharing your faith. I'm all for sharing your values. But there's a healthy way to do it and there's a toxic way to do it. And unfortunately, by the end, multiple of my siblings have attempted suicide. I have considered suicide numerous times over the years. I was diagnosed with PTSD, suicide, or depression and generalized anxiety disorder. So I've come through it all on the other side, thank God, literally because of God. And I talk about that, how I believe my faith and God got me through it.
Your book so far has been compared to other similar memoirs like Hillbilly Elegy by now U.S. Senator J.D. Vance, also The Educated book. What does it mean to you when you're compared to some of these other memoirs? But obviously you have your own different twist to it. Do you think publishers and others who are book reviewers rather see something in it? And does it give you hope that more people will be interested by your story and how you survived and overcame and also reclaimed faith? Because I know that was a big part of the story. That's a big part of your memoir, how you were kind of disillusioned by Christianity, and then you came around to find refuge again in it in a different denomination. So could you speak to why you think publishers and reviewers are finding your faith journey interesting?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now, like I said, the mental illness crisis right now, I see a big disconnect between the solution to it and the people who are supposed to be implementing that solution. And by that, I mean, if you look at faith, so like I said, being raised in a very abusive, fringe offshoot Mormon cult, I eventually grew to hate God or the idea of God. I became agnostic. I call that a shoulder shrugger, where you're just like, I don't know. You know, for an atheist says there's definitely no God. A believer says there definitely is. I just said, I don't know, because if there is one, he probably hates me. I know your family has some experience, you know, with Holocaust and, you know, seeing horrific things done on earth. How would a loving God allow this to happen? And so I just didn't believe there either wasn't a God, or he was probably a jerk, or he was indifferent to me. And so I was in that space for about 12 years. But I tried lots of things to replace God. And I'm not alone. I never tried alcohol addiction or drug addiction, but I unfortunately ended up dating a secret drug addict and a secret alcoholic without my knowledge. But it was the fact that I was attracted to addictive behavior because I was so used to having an abusive father. I was used to upholding abusive partners. And then I tried other things to take the place of God, like my career. And it all just kept failing and not bringing that lasting source of peace and healing until I was baptized as a Protestant Christian in December 2017. And that's when I felt more understanding about kind of what was happening in the world in terms of understanding God and understanding what should be worshipped versus, you know, they say it's like the creator versus the created. And so often people get caught up in worshiping, whether it's money or power or just whatever you fixate on, that's what you worship. And unfortunately, some people actually, they use religion and they actually worship religion when they should be worshiping God. So that's a major theme of the book, is the difference between God and religion. But all that to say is that from a public health standpoint, my experience that my faith and my faith community, like my church community, is like my family now. And they're there for me. And it's my network of support, and it's incredible. But I'm not alone in this, that there's all kinds of studies. So I talk in the book, I mentioned there's a study from the Harvard School of Public Health, and they found that women who go to church once a week are 68% less likely to die by suicide or drug overdose or alcohol overdose. And men are 33% less likely. That's pretty significant in both cases. There was another study, it was a literature review of 93 different studies on this issue of faith and mental health. And they reviewed 93 studies, and they found 66% of those studies found a strong correlation between faith, religious participation, and lower depression rates. It's similarly, it's again, these are not religious outlets. The National Bureau of Economic Research, NBER, which is in Boston, and it's a feeder research ground for a lot of the Federal Reserve chairs or members. So it's very prestigious, or very, I should say, at least influential economists who are there. And they put out a paper showing a strong relationship between states that have high religious participation and lower deaths of despair, which is, again, the suicides, the drug overdoses, and the alcohol overdoses. So when you literally have all this science and evidence and data proving the strength and the power of God and religious community, and then on the flip side, Harvard also did a study on the religious beliefs of the different professors across all these different disciplines. And not shocking, but very sad, the two professors, I guess, the disciplines that had the most atheists, or the most aversion to God or organized religion, sadly, it was psychologists and biologists. So the very people who are supposed to be healing our mental illness and helping provide good therapy and solutions, they're literally hostile to the beliefs and the community and the traditions that can save your life. And so I that's part of why I wrote the book, is I think also too on the right, sometimes there's a reluctance to get mental health care, that it's mumbo jumbo. And I think part of it why is because a lot of the psychologists have been taken over by the woke left. So there's this gap between what we need and the people who are supposed to provide it to us. And I think ultimately, yes, for me, I say it's been a combination of prayer and therapy. I have therapists shopped. I've had multiple different therapists. Some are terrible, but the ones I've had that have been the most effective for me are believers.
That's very profound. And I'll just correct you a little bit. My family, thankfully, was not affected by the Holocaust, communism more so, but my mom's side had a German labor camp. So I wanted to correct that, because I thankfully, to my knowledge, did not have any family members killed in the Holocaust, but Soviet Union, Stalin, yes. And they disliked my Jewish members, much like they disliked my Russian Orthodox and Catholic members too. But that's such a profound statement, Carrie, that by a combination of returning to faith and then also seeking out medical help, really did put you back on the course of, happiness and fulfillment and really healing for the most part, from such a tumultuous upbringing. And you're absolutely right. I think also the reason why some people may forgo getting therapy or seeking out help is because, like you said, it's encumbered by wokeness, or a lot of people are like, well, this perpetuates big government. I wanted to ask you, stemming from, your upbringing and your experiences and just kind of your work in policy, what type of remedies do you think would work to help people who have similarly gone through something you've gone through, horrible traumas, moving all over the place, feeling kind of like down and in a rut, and feeling like there's no hope. So what do you think in your mind, as someone who supports limited government policies, kind of, is antithetical, or supports policies that are antithetical to big government? What can be done to help people with mental illness or, PTSD in your experience?
Yeah, so, and my parents were on welfare on and off, and also Mormon church welfare. So the LDS Church has a really strong safety net program, which is, I think, really great. And that's private welfare. It's private charity, it's private church. So I think that that's a good solution in terms of the safety net, that the private sector or private charity and faith-based charities, they're the ones who actually are the most effective. I've seen this over and over. They're the most effective at, for example, helping drug addicts rehabilitate. And the 12-step program, which has strong results for people with substance abuse, it relies on a higher power, that you have to surrender yourself to a higher power. So to me, that's the antidote to big government, is using private faith and private charity to help rehabilitate people in a way that the government cannot. The government is not a religious institution, so they can't promote God. And it's interesting because I know sometimes there have been some contracting groups who are faith-based, but this has been litigated, that even just like Catholic schools or Christian schools, if they're working and they're helping kids get out of poverty and get out of brokenness and create a better life for themselves, but they are faith-based, they're still eligible for government money. So I think that that's excellent, whether it's education or community centers, shifting, if there is any public funding, to these type of contractors who are effective. And you should be, and yes, religious institutions, there is corruption. They should be monitored. You need metrics all across the board. But again, the science and the data is there to support these faith-based groups. I think also for school choice, that's a big topic that I discuss in the book, because I ended up going to 17 public schools and homeschool, which means I've seen a lot of schools just from user experience, and urban, suburban, rural settings. And the two worst of those 17 public schools, I did not enjoy homeschool either, but that was because it was done wrong. I am a big supporter of homeschool, but not the way we did it. But the two worst public schools were very violent. They were inner city. They were overwhelmingly Black student body. I was bullied for being white. My Black classmates who were friends with me were bullied for being friends with a white girl. And unfortunately, what I saw from these schools was that these students were trapped there. So we ended up going on to the next school, and leaving that area. But this school district had the dishonor, it's Kansas City Public Schools in Missouri. They had the dishonor of being the very first school district in the entire country to lose their accreditation.
Wow.
And we had to wait every morning to go into these schools to go through metal detectors. So sometimes you could be waiting outside for an hour to process everybody through. And you had people getting in fights on a daily basis, throwing chairs at each other in the classroom, teachers absentee or just apathetic or scared. And then you had materials. I was in 6th and 8th grade that I had seen probably in maybe 2nd or 3rd grade. So you can't learn in this environment. It's chaotic, it's dangerous. And again, we left, but unfortunately, a lot of these kids are trapped. And I think it's a civil rights issue that the white progressives from a generation ago who were trying to keep these Black students out of certain classrooms are now trying to keep them trapped in these classrooms. And I think that is a horrific crime against social justice, if we want to use that phrase, since the left loves to use that phrase. That's something we can do. So that experience firsthand forever made me support school choice. I think also, like I said, this knowledge of trauma and what it does to you. I think that on the right, sometimes there's this drumbeat, which I agree with it. It's the message is correct, but the understanding is flawed. So the message is that all you need to do is get married. Because if we get married, that's the success sequence is you have a 97% likelihood to stay out of poverty if you do this sequence. You graduate from high school, you get married, and then you have the baby. That's the success sequence. And I've seen it over and over the conservatives talk about. And it's true. That is the success sequence. If you do those things, when you do them out of order, or you don't do them, you drop out of high school, you have the baby before you're married, or you never get married, you will most likely, statistically, there's a very good chance you'll be in poverty. Well, why don't people follow the success sequence? It seems so simple, right?
Right.
Well, the answer is trauma. And conservatives don't seem to understand this. So I have a chapter in the book about some of the men that I've dated. And I hide the details. There's no identifying information, but I've dated some very abusive men. And the reason why is because I was an abused child. And it's so common, whether it's the child of an alcoholic or just a physically abusive parent, to then perpetuate that cycle and marry an abuser. And quite often, if you talk to women who are on welfare, they don't want to marry the man. They don't want to marry the father because he's an abuser. They don't want him in the home. And sometimes it is financial. Sometimes there is a financial incentive to not get married in terms of the government welfare benefits. That is a problem, but it's only part of the problem. The bigger problem, I believe, to the brokenness of the family is the unresolved trauma. And a lot of times people do end up getting married, even if they have unresolved trauma, as was the case of my dad. My dad was raped by a Mormon babysitter, this woman who was trusted in his congregation or his community as a child. And he never got that resolved. He never got it treated. I said to him when I was in college, why didn't you go to therapy or process this? Because he would talk about how it made him suicidal as an adult. And he wouldn't go because he said, oh, God will take care of me. But clearly it didn't. In terms of God gave us mental health care. I believe God gave us therapy when it's done right, to help us process and understand. And honestly, if you hate the word therapy, just use the word counseling or whatever. Counseling, therapy is a modern word, but just the idea of even just talking to a priest or confession, and understanding the woundedness that you have inside you and how it affects your decisions and the way you treat people and the way you respond to people. Because when you have PTSD, you go from 0 to 70. So even if someone that you love is trying to do something loving towards you, or sometimes they hurt you, but it's on the scale of offenses, it's pretty minor, but the way you feel it is exacerbated because of the trauma. Your life's going to be a lot worse. And I've seen this over and over, where I would go from 0 to 70, even in just a normal setting, because of my trauma response. And if you don't have that understanding of what trauma does to you, and so many people, again, they they either get married and they should never have married this person because this person's an abuser, or they themselves are an abuser and they don't realize it because they haven't processed their trauma. So I think as conservatives, we have to grapple with that and understand that's a big part, I believe, of what's causing this intergenerational poverty and intergenerational broken families.
Yeah, that does seem to be like a good summary. And then also what's, I feel like facilitating this separate from what you outlined, I feel like, I don't know if it's like a ubiquitous use of digital media. I feel like the kids coming behind us, the Gen Zers, they keep complaining about like anxiety, whether it's related to the climate or because they're just online and on their phones all the time, 24/7. So I think it can also, your words can also relate to those who may be struggling too, because they don't know how to handle perhaps reality, or maybe they're being told that they have to be, anxious about certain things and that they have to be here and do this. So I think it also can apply to people who are suffering from anxiety and other mental health related issues because they just don't know how to properly cope, or maybe they've been indoctrinated to believe something and they have to be worried about something. So I think it does have multiple purposes, your words there. But Carrie, if someone is, let's say, reading your book or watching this conversation or reading our profile of you or reading my profile of you at town hall, and they're going through something similar to what you did, probably someone up and coming, what type of piece of advice would you give to someone who may be in your shoes currently, a young woman or a young man? They don't know what to do. They feel hopeless. What type of advice would you impart to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you had an abusive childhood, and in my case, I was able to have professional success and put up a facade that everything was okay. But it all came crashing down in 2019 when I was hospitalized 7 times for fibromyalgia, and I almost died from a drug reaction they gave me because I was in the ER for the fibromyalgia, and I almost died. I talk about it in the book. So all that to say is this pressure built and built and built, because in my head, I had been so competent. I got a full tuition scholarship to Harvard. I worked at Goldman Sachs, which is the top financial bank or financial institution, and I had been going on all these major talk shows like the Bill Maher Show and Primetime Fox and MSNBC and debating all these, hard left figures and taking on 5-on-1. And so I was at the top of my game in my professional life, but inside I was still unresolved. So I would say to someone, do not underestimate how much your personal trauma will affect you later on if you do not process it, understand it. You're going to overreact to things in your professional life. You're going to overreact to things. You're going to choose toxic partners. You're going to burn bridges if you don't understand a trauma response. If someone says something to you that offends you, if you have PTSD, you go to warpath, you overreact sometimes, and you don't want to do that. So I think I would say, do not stop. Don't stop. Don't collect $200, on the Monopoly board. Like, don't ignore your trauma and seek out. I recommend a good counselor to help you talk through it. Seek out a healthy faith community. There's what's known as deliverance ministry in the prayer life. So I would recommend finding a deliverance ministry. And what that does is it actually, I do believe in spiritual warfare, where, and even if you're not spiritual or you're not Christian like I am, it's still the same idea that your thoughts affect, they say, so a thought reap an act, so an act reap a habit, so a habit reap a character, so a character reap a destiny. If your thoughts are constantly being barraged by negativity, so in my case, my dad, like I said, he pronounced all sorts of evil things of me. He said, he raised his hand, he said, I prophesy in the name of Jesus, you'll be raped and murdered if you leave the cult. And so to have your own father say things like that to you regularly over decades, even after I left him, he would send me these letters with horrible prophecies and pronouncements over me. Well, so quite often you become the script in your head is put in there by your parents. And so stopping that script, understanding where that script is coming from, deliverance ministry through prayer can help you do that, but also through CBT, which I think is the most effective type of therapy which is cognitive behavioral therapy.
Carrie, once again, can you please plug the book and tell everyone watching or reading where they can find it and purchase it?
Sure. Yeah, here it is. It's Motorhome Prophecies, a journey of healing and forgiveness. And again, I think the connection between mental health is spiritual health. That's my biggest takeaway for what's happening in our culture right now, that God is the source of our healing and also the source of our forgiveness. So my hope is for anybody watching that if you're struggling with these things, or maybe you know someone who's struggling, or you just want to support people who are struggling, that you'll get some ideas from the book on how to do that, on how to show compassion to people. And as conservatives, we're all about faith, family, and accountability. I think all of those things are things that God wants for us.
It's been wonderful to hear your story. I don't know how you do all this, but you're an inspiration to me, Carrie. I want you to know that. And I hope that those watching or reading or discovering your story also take away the similar sentiment. I wish you tremendous success with the book. Can't wait to share it with everyone. And I hope everyone does follow Carrie's lead and heed her advice. Get her book. Let's support good authors like her, good conservatives. And Carrie, thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thank you, Gabby. And thanks for all you do.